Hello there. I am Kaybe Angel, and this is Angelic Encounters. Roll for initiative.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever it may be for you. I am Kaybe Angel. I am a professional game master and an amateur VTuber. This is the second part of our debut video, How to Slay a Goblin. In this series, we are comparing the basics of combat in a variety of TTRPG systems. In our first video, link in the description, we covered Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, Dungeon Crawl Classics, GURPS, and Dungeon World. In this video, we will cover two more systems, specifically Fate Core and Savage Worlds. In the previous video, I also promised that we would cover Torchbearer. However, that's going to require a bit more space of its own and will be its own future video. Check the timestamps in the description to jump to a specific section. For each game, we're going to play out the same scenario as in part 1. We will assume a fantasy setting where a lone melee fighter type character encounters a goblin in a dungeon. If the system has rules relating to stealth or surprise, we will examine them, and then proceed into the standard combat. Admittedly, these are all games which should involve a party of players, but in the interest of time, and since our focus is on basic attacks, we will only be looking at a simple one-on-one combat. Now, let's get started. All the rules for the Fate system are available for free on the Fate SRD website. Link in the description below. I'm saying that a lot today, aren't I? Fate comes in 3 main flavors: condensed, accelerated, and core. Though all of them are very flexible rule sets that one is encouraged to modify highly for your own campaign. Fate is almost more of a toolbox than a system, able to create almost any kind of story with a few lever pulls of the mechanics. This can be seen in the various world books for Fate, covering things like superheroes, space, and the secrets of cats. Fate, like GURPS in our previous example, doesn't have levels or classes. Instead, we have to define heroes' aspects. Short phrases that describe our character, which can be invoked for or against us, as applicable. Choose our skills, and select a number of stunts. Stunts are similar to feats in Dungeons & Dragons, for example. Since this video is not covering detailed character creation, I'm going to simply run down the choices that I made for Hero and show his filled-in sheet. For our Fate example, Hero McGoodguy has the high concept of rookie adventurer. He's been something like a level 1 warrior in all of our other examples. As such, I'm also going to make his trouble, which is basically a negative, mostly negative aspect that can be invoked against him by the Game Master, that he is inexperienced and overconfident. His other aspects are adventure nerd. I see him being a fan of adventure stories, and this might help him know about monsters or places and things associated with famous heroes and adventurers. Talented with a sword, he might be a rookie, but he's got the potential to be something amazing, if he survives. And for the last one, I chose improvisational. Not sure if that's going to come up in this example, but I like to see him as the sort of adventurer who's going to make heavy use of the environment and things like water, fire, poison, explosives, etc. If the party lets him. And I've chosen to give him these skills at these levels. And I'll assume you've seen part 1 of this series, understand our basic setup, and we will skip to the end of the intro here.
Up ahead, you see a wooden door on your right side. The hallway continues beyond it. What do you do? I creep up to the door, and I listen to what's on the other side.
In Fate, there are basically 4 types of roles. When you make any of these types of rolls, you roll 4 fate dice, also sometimes called fudge dice. These are special 6-sided dice that have 2 plus sides, 2 minus signs, and 2 blank sides. You roll these 4 fate dice and count each plus as a 1, each minus as a -1, and each blank as a 0, generating a result between +4 and -4 with a bell curve distribution around 0. You then add the bonus you have for your skill, if you have any. The 4 types of rolls that you can make are rolls to overcome, to create an advantage, to attack, and to defend. Theoretically, any skill could be used for any type of roll if narrating positioning allowed it, but some will be more obvious than others. For example, I don't know how you use the notice skill to make an attack. Certain stunts, more on those later, will give you additional ways to use certain skills. In our scenario, a goblin is hiding in the dark in the next room. It knew Hero was coming because the goblin can see in the dark as one of its stunts, and easily notices the light from Hero's torch leaking under the door. The GM, knowing that this is about to become a conflict, a term Fate uses for any sort of protracted struggle between 2 or more characters, including but not limited to physical combat, and decides to have the goblin attempt to use their fair stealth skill to create an advantage and get the drop on the hero. So they want to create an aspect on the scene called Hidden in Shadows. Hero will get to roll their notice as a defend action against the goblin's attempt. Rolling my dice, I have gotten that the goblin rolls a plus, a minus, and 2 blanks. 0 total on their dice, plus their +2 average stealth skill. Fair stealth skill. The GM decides that they would really like to have the goblin succeed here, and so will spend a fate point to invoke their main aspect, Sneaky Goblin. Players and the GM both have their own pool of fate points. For players, they have a number equal to their refresh stat, which is by default 3, for each session. The GM, however, gets 1 fate point per player per scene. For players, however, this should be an economy of sorts. Yes, they start with 3 typically, but they are also rewarded with fate points whenever someone invokes one of their aspects against them. Typically, the GM makes a compel against their trouble, which complicates the situation. Or, situationally, they may compel another aspect. Players also gain additional fate points if they concede in a conflict. We'll talk more about concession later in the fight. Invoking Sneaky Goblin gives the goblin an additional +2 for a +4 result to create an advantage. Alright. As Hero listens, the something on the other side of the door is trying to hide. Our audience sees a shadowy figure moving towards the side of the room, with your torchlight leaking under the door. They're trying to create an advantage using stealth. Please defend with notice. Okay. I rolled 2 pluses and 2 blanks. That's +2 for the dice and +1 from my average notice for a +3 total. The creature got a +4, so that's a normal success. He's now hidden in shadows and has 1 free invoke. Hero pushes open the door and walks into an ambush. Fate points aren't the only way to benefit from aspects. When you successfully create an advantage, you add 1, or 2 if you succeed with style, free invokes on that aspect, which allow you to gain the benefits of spending a fate point on that aspect without spending one of your actual fate points. You can also use the Create an Advantage action to add additional free invokes to an existing aspect, if that makes sense, within the fiction. If there are no free invokes on an aspect, you can always spend a fate point from your pool to invoke it anyway. Okay, so this is going to be a conflict. First, we need to set the scene and declare some aspects. I'm going to say that this is a dark room with stone floors. The room is filled with boxes. There's an old statue in the middle and a large bronze statue in the back. And there is, of course, the old wooden door. We have 3 zones, I suppose. We have the room itself. Behind the boxes might be another zone, and the hallway on the other side of the old wooden door. For turn order, because they are ambushing you, we'll have the Goblin go first. As you stand in the room, emerging from the shadows, there is a horrible little creature which rushes towards you, swinging a scimitar and yelling in its Goblin language. The Goblin is going to attack as it emerges. I get, -3 on the dice. Okay. I'm going to use my free invoke on Hidden in Shadows in order to re-roll that. An invoke can be used to re-roll instead of the standard +2, which can be better if you roll particularly badly, like the GM did here. Okay. With the re-roll, that's a +1 on the dice. +1 fight, so that's +2 total. Now, you roll to defend using a skill. Typically, this is with fight, unless you have any stunts, which can change that. I'll roll with my fight. I roll 0 +3 for my fight is +3 total. That's good, right? Good for you. Yeah, that beats his attack outright. There would have been some benefit to him on a tie, but with a success, you negate all the effects. You parry his blow with your sword, just in the nick of time. Now, you are engaged with him, and it is your turn. All right. I seem to be the better fighter than him, so I'm just going to try and take him down quickly. I raise my sword and swing down at him. I roll. -2 on the dice, but fortunately, I am a talented swordsman, which will make my final total -2 on the dice, +2 for the invoke, +3 fight skill for +3 total. To be clear, player is spending a fate point here in order to invoke their talented swordsman aspect. Alright, Goblin will attempt to defend. That is 2 on his dice for a 3 total, and that's a tie. You won't harm him, but you will gain a boost. A boost is like an aspect with a free invoke on it, but it is an intentionally temporary one. Some aspects may fade when no longer narratively applicable, such as the Goblin's Hidden in Shadows from earlier, but some aspects, like I have the high ground, can last until they've been overcome. Even if they have no more free invokes on them, they could still be invoked using fate points. But a boost always fades as soon as it's spent, and should be named in such a way as to be consistent with that. Okay, let's say he's parried the blow, but my strength is such that I'm overwhelming for my boost. That works for me. His turn now. He's going to make another attack. That is a +2 total. Defending with fight, I get another +3. Alright, time to press my advantage. On my turn, I'll attack. +0 on the dice, +3 fight skill, and because I'm overwhelming him, that is another +2 for +5 total. That might do it. Let's see his defense. Rolling. He nets +2, so that means you score a hit. No, you score a success with style. Because it's a success with style, you can either make this a +3 shift hit, or you can reduce it by 1 and make it a 2 shift hit, but you also get to claim a boost. I'll take the +3 hit. I want to take him out if I can. Now we get to see what damage looks like in Fate. Fate doesn't really have hit points, HP, the way many other systems do. Instead, a character is able to take a certain amount of stress and consequences. When an attack is successful, the net success is the value of the hit, measured in shifts. So here, Hero got a +5 against the Goblin's +2. The difference is 3, so that's a 3-shift hit. Characters absorb shifts with stress boxes and consequence boxes. Stress and consequences both come in physical or mental varieties. Some settings may add additional types of stress and consequences. I've seen resources used in more than one example. Player characters typically start with 2 physical and 2 mental stress boxes, gaining a 3rd or a 4th with high levels of the physique or will skills. The number of stress boxes is also the size of the box. Your first box can hold a 1-shift hit. The second box can hold a 2-shift hit. The third, if you have one, a 3-shift hit. And the fourth box, again, if you have one, a 4-shift hit. When using stress to absorb a hit, you may only mark a single box of the appropriate size or larger. So you can use your 4th stress box to take a 3-shift hit, if the 3 box is already full. But you cannot use your 1 and 2 boxes together to take a single 3-shift hit. You typically want to use your stress boxes first. This is because stress is cleared at the end of the conflict, or anytime you get a minute to catch your breath. It's temporary. It represents your character's ability to narrowly avoid a much worse consequence. Speaking of, if you do not have a stress box that can take the hit you just received, then you must either take a consequence or the appropriate size, or be taken out of the conflict. A consequence represents something more significant than stress. It's an injury or a setback that is lasting. Each player character has 3 consequence slots, a mild, a medium, and a severe box, which can absorb a 2, 4, or 6-shift hit, respectively, exactly the way a stress box does. But when a consequence is taken, an aspect is created. Players only have 3 consequence slots, which are used for both physical and mental consequences. Meaning, if you take a 2-shift mental hit, but your mild consequence slot is already filled with a cut on your hand, then you need to use mental stress or a higher level consequence to take the hit. There is one additional caveat to using consequences. You can combine a stress box and a consequence box. For example, if you suffer a 6-shift hit, you could take a severe consequence, or you could take a medium consequence and mark the second stress box. Consequences, unlike stress, require recovery rolls and significant narrative time to recover from. They are not cleared lightly. NPCs can have any level of stress and consequences that the GM wishes, of course, but generally a nameless NPC that is mostly just an obstacle for the player characters to overcome isn't going to have any consequence slots. They will have between 0 and 2 stress boxes, depending on their threat level. More important NPCs should have a level of consequence slots comparable to the amount of time you expect them to be in the narrative. A monster or bad guy minion showing up for a single conflict maybe has a mild consequence slot available, maybe, just enough to prolong their cool fight scene, or their dramatic debate. A lieutenant of the bad guy or the villain of a short adventure might have a mild and a medium slot, using those slots to tank some hits in the middle point of the adventure before they flee, and those consequences then come back to haunt them in the finale. While a major antagonist for an entire arc should probably have access to a severe consequence slot. If you suffer a hit in a conflict, and cannot or will not soak it with stress and or consequences, then you are taken out. Let's talk about the two ways you can lose a conflict. Once a conflict begins, turns continue until all characters on one side have been taken out or conceded. The difference between being taken out of a conflict and conceding a conflict comes down to who gets to narrate your defeat. If a character is taken out by suffering an attack that they cannot or will not soak with stress and consequences, then the attacker gets to say what happens to them, up to and including death. It doesn't have to be death. The attacker may narrate your panicked retreat instead, or your capture. But whatever they decide, they have the narrative control. If you are losing a fight and want to avoid being taken out, you can choose to concede a conflict. You may interrupt another character's turn to concede, but you must do so before dice hit the table. Once an attack is rolled, it must be resolved. When you concede, you lose the conflict. The other combatant typically gets what they wanted, or in the case of multiple combatants, you are removed from the conflict and are no longer a threat to the enemy nor an aid to your allies. But it's not all bad. When you concede, you get a fate point, plus an additional fate point for any consequences you suffered in this conflict before you conceded. Second, you get to narrate what your loss looks like. Yes, you lost, and the narration has to reflect that, and you can't use this privilege to undermine your opponent's victory either. What you say happens has to pass the muster with the group. This can be the difference, though, between being mistakenly left for dead and being captured by the enemy, or fleeing a bad situation, letting the bad guys keep the MacGuffin, but living to fight another day. The GM can also choose to concede on behalf of their NPCs, and they get extra fate points just like players do for the next scene. It's only for that scene. And they get to narrate their villain's defeat. A useful mechanism for a GM who wants to set up a recurring villain. Alright, so you hit him for a +3 shift. He's only got one stress box and no consequences, so that'll take him out. How do you want to do this? Savage Worlds is another generic RPG, equally happy to run in fantasy, supers, sci-fi, westerns, etc. Like Fate, there are numerous setting books to cover all sorts of campaigns. For this series, though, we will be continuing to slay goblins in a dungeon. To talk about Savage Worlds, I will be referencing the Savage Worlds Deluxe Edition rulebook, as that is the one that I own a physical copy of. There is a newer edition called Adventure Edition that I understand has some major new features and significantly reworks several aspects of the game, but I am told keeps the core mechanics intact. Just keep in mind that if you get the newest edition, some details I might mention here may have changed. For Hero, I'm going to use one of the sample character archetypes from Savage Worlds Deluxe, the stronger, strength-based fighter variant. For the Goblin, we'll use the standard Goblin stats from the Bestiary on page 137 through 138 of Savage Worlds Deluxe. Once more, we will have the same setup. Hero is entering the dungeon with a sword in his right hand and a torch in his left. The Goblin sees him coming from the light under the door and will attempt to ambush. Savage Worlds contrasts with GURPS, the generic system from our previous video, by being more focused on creating a fast-paced, pulpy adventure, compared with GURPS's dedication to high simulationism. This will be evident in the ease in which our hero dispatches a lone goblin.
Up ahead, you see a wooden door on your right side. The hallway continues beyond it. What do you do? I creep up to the door, and I listen to what's on the other side.
One point we must make at the beginning is the distinction between characters who are wild cards and characters who are extras. The PCs, along with unique allies, villains, and monsters, are wildcards. Being a wildcard permits them to take wounds, gain a beneficial wild die on all of their checks, more detail on that later, and get a certain number of bennies, a meta currency similar to fate points from our previous example, to be spent on avoiding harm and re-rolling failures per session. Extras do not gain these benefits, though the GM can use their own pool of NPC bennies to aid them if desired. For this example, Hero is a wildcard, while the Goblin is an extra. Looking over the stealth rules, though, I find this a bit awkward to adjudicate in Savage Worlds. There are rules under stealth skill for sneaking past guards, but it's worded in a way that specifically calls attention to the players doing it, as opposed to being a general rule. And there are some vague guidelines relating to surprise, but I can find nothing relating to an NPC attempting to hide. Please correct me if in the comments if I'm missing something. My ruling at this moment, though, and what I would do at a table, is I would have the Goblin roll their stealth against the hero's notice. If the hero wins, then they are alerted to the Goblin, and may choose to fight, and then they can do so without being surprised. If the Goblin wins, then the hero doesn't hear anything, and if he enters the room, we'll just let it ride with the previous stealth and notice roll, resulting in hero being surprised for the first round, and the Goblin being able to get the drop on him in the first round, giving a bonus to hit. Okay, go ahead and roll a notice test for me. Okay, my notice is a d6, and I get to roll the wild die as well,
Yes.
right? So roll a second d6 as well and pick the higher. All skills and attributes in Savage Worlds are rated by die size, ranging from a d4 to a d12. Or in some super-powered games, or for truly monstrous foes, I think it can even go up to a d20. When you make a roll, called a trait test, you roll the appropriate skill or attributes die. If you are a wild card, like Hero McGoodguy, you also roll a wild die, which is always a d6, and you take the higher result. This gives wild cards a little bit of an extra edge against even equally skilled extras. If any die, as part of a test, rolls its maximum number, the die is said to have aced, and you roll it again, adding the totals together. For example, if you roll a d6 and you get a 6, you roll that die again, getting the result of the second die plus the first 6. You can ace multiple times, keep rolling and adding to the total until you don't roll an ace. If both your die and the wild die come up a 1, that is a critical failure, and the GM describes something additionally bad which happens. Typically, you are looking to hit or exceed a target number of 4. Harder or easier situations give you modifiers to your roll instead of this target number. For example, if you are trying to track someone and the track's left in the mud, that might give you +2 to your roll. Or if you're doing it at night by torchlight, that might give you a -2, or -4 in the middle of a rainstorm. Though, if an action is opposed, then the TN becomes the other creature's roll, or a passive number calculated from their stats, which we'll see when we get to an attack being made very soon. If you beat the target number by 4, that is called a raise. You get 1 raise for each full multiple of 4 by which you beat the target number. For example, if you rolled a 12 against a target number of 4, that would be a success, because you got at least 4, and 2 raises. First raise for getting at least an 8, 4 more than 4, and a second raise at 12 for getting another 4 above that 8. You'd get another raise at a 16, a 20, etc. And remember, aces can continue compounding, so you could get, theoretically, infinite number of raises if you kept rolling well. Raises can give different benefits depending on the skill and situation, but are especially powerful in combat, increasing the damage of your attacks. For this, Hero makes his notice test. He rolls 2 6-sided dice, 1 for his notice skill of a d6, and 1 for his wildcard status, being his wild die. He rolls a 5 and a 2, he discards the 2, and announces to the GM that he has rolled a 5. The Goblin has a D10 for stealth, but is not a wild card. So he only gets to roll the single D10. He rolls, and he gets a 6 on the D10. 6 beats Hero's 5. You listen at the door, you don't hear anything. Well, he's around here somewhere. I keep my sword raised, and I open the door. As you enter the room, the Goblin launches his ambush, leaping from the dark corner and trying to cut you down with surprise. I'll draw a card for his initiative now. In Savage Worlds, initiative is handled by dealing cards from a standard playing card deck with the jokers left in. That's important. Every wild card gets 1 card. Every group of identical extras gets 1 card. Allied extras should be divided up by the players and act on the same card as their controlling player. Turn order then follows a countdown. Aces first, then king, queen, jack, 10, 9, all the way down to deuce. Ties are resolved by suit order. Spades first, then hearts, diamonds, and then clubs, for a standard American deck. The reverse alphabetical order of the suit names. The Joker, however, is special. If a character is dealt a Joker, then they may choose to act at any point in the initiative, going first, or even interrupting another character's turn. Additionally, the Joker gives a +2 on all trait tests and damage rolls that the character makes this turn. At the end of the round, the cards are discarded and a new hand is dealt, unless a Joker was dealt during the round. If a Joker was dealt, you shuffle all the cards back into the deck. This guarantees that eventually Jokers will be drawn. In our first round, since Hero is surprised, they don't get to draw a card. The GM does still draw for the Goblin in case they get a Joker. On your turn, you may move up to your pace and make their actions. All distances in Savage Worlds are given in inches on the table, but these can be easily modified to squares or hexes on your grid, or by saying that 1 inch equals 2 yards in your theater of mind. Typically, a character makes a single action on their turn, but they may choose to make multiple actions instead, with some limitations. The player of the character must declare all actions up front. For example, I am going to taunt the enemy, and then attack with my sword. Each action after the first gives a -2 to all rolls for that turn. So you can make 1 action normally, or you can make 2 actions at -2 to both, or 3 actions at -4 to all 3 of them, and so on. Okay, I drew a 5 of diamonds. The Goblin moves up to you and will make an attack. And he's got a D6 for fight. Let's see. I rolled a 1, but he has the drop on you, which gives him +4, so that's a total of 5. Tough luck, GM. I've got a 7 parry. That's a miss. The target number for a melee attack is equal to the parry value of the targeted character. Parry is calculated as 2 plus half the fighting skill of the target. Hero has a fighting skill of D10, so we half that for 5. They have 2 plus 5 for a parry of 7. The Goblin has picked a poor target for this attack. Going forward, without the +4 bonus for having the drop on the hero, he needs to roll a 6 on his D6, which will ace and become a D6 plus 6 in order to actually threaten to hurt Hero. Well, now a new round begins. I'll deal the card. Goblin gets a 3 of clubs, and I got the 3 of hearts. Hearts go before clubs, so you go next. Alright, well, he's right on top of me, and I have my sword out, so I'm just going to try and intimidate him, and then I'll attack. So, 2 actions. You'll have a -2 on both rolls. Yeah, but I'm confident in my attack rolling well, at least. Alright, roll intimidation for the test of wills. Attacking isn't the only way to help out in a combat. More mentally focused characters might have the taunt skill, or a tough guy might have the intimidation skill. Either skill can be used in combat to start a test of wills. A test of wills is an opposed roll. Taunt is opposed by smarts, or intimidation opposed by spirit. If the attacker wins, they get a +2 on their next action against the target. And if they win with a raise, the target is shaken. The shaken condition is very important in Savage Worlds. It's typically the first step in defeating an opponent. A successful damage roll without any raises, 0 to 3 over the target's toughness, results in the target being shaken, if they are not already. If they are already shaken, though, that same level of success would be a wound. Any wound takes out an extra. If a target is shaken at the start of their turn, they must roll Spirit against a target number of 4. On a failure, they can only do free actions and remain shaken. On a success, they can still only take free actions, but are not shaken anymore. And only with a raise can they end the shaking condition and take their normal actions. A player character may spend a Benny to end the shaking condition as if they rolled with a raise. So you can see, a character with a high taunt or intimidation skill, but low fighting or shooting can still contribute to party combat effectiveness by softening up targets and denying them their actions. Okay, rolling intimidation. I rolled 2 and 4 on the dice, -2 for the multiple action penalty, that is 2. Dang. It is opposed, though. Let's roll his spirit. He has a d6 and rolls 2. That means you succeeded by 0. You get a +2 on your next roll against him, but that's not enough to make him shaken. Well, I guess at least the +2 cancels out my -2 from the multi-action penalty. Let's make my attack roll. Got a d10 fighting die. So d10 and a d6. The d10 comes up a 6. Wild die is a 2, so that's a 6 to hit. The Goblin has a parry of 5, so that's a hit. Roll your damage. Excellent. I have a longsword, so that's my strength die, which is a d10, plus the d8 from the weapon. I roll 10 and a 4. That's 14 total damage. Ooh, yikes. That's a lot of damage. Let's compare it to the Goblin's toughness. He has a 4, so an 8 would be a raise, and 12 would be 2 raises, so yikes. Each raise means 1 wound. He's an extra. He doesn't take wounds, and is taken out of the fight. How do you want to do this? And that's the end of the line for an extra. Wildcard characters like PCs, villains, and unique monsters can take a number of wounds before falling. Wildcards can take up to 3 wounds and continue acting, with a -1 on all tests going forward for each wound they accrue. If a wildcard would ever reach 4 wounds, either through one massive hit or several smaller ones, they are instead set to 3 wounds and are incapacitated, and must immediately roll their Vigor attribute. Their fate is determined by the result of this test, possibly resulting in immediate death, or various injuries of various durations. The character is also considered to be bleeding out, and needs to make a Vigor roll at the start of each round, until they succeed with a raise and stabilize, or an ally uses the healing skill, or some other magical effect. Failure on the bleeding out roll results in death. Wildcards have 1 additional recourse against wounds. They can spend 1 of their limited pool of bennies to attempt to soak damage. When you soak damage, you spend a benny, and you make a Vigor check. A success and each raise rolled reduces the number of wounds suffered by 1. If the soak roll reduces the wounds to 0, the character is also not shaken as a result of the attack. And that's the basics of combat in Savage Worlds. Thank you all for watching the series so far. I had promised that the system Torchbearer would be in this series, but it turns out that the system is going to be a bit of a bigger fish to fry, so it's getting its own video in the near future, which will probably be the last in the How to Slay a Goblin series, at least for a while. After that, my next series I want to do is a bit similar, How to Negotiate with a Goblin. Combat is, after all, only one part of TTRPGs, and many systems, social skills, and interactions are mechanized in various ways. From the persuasion checks, to influence skills, reaction rolls, battles of wits, I'll be examining all those sorts of systems very soon. If any of this has intrigued you today, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you have any GMing questions or video ideas, please leave them in the comments below, and perhaps I'll make a video on the subject in the future. Additionally, please check out my links in the descriptions for all of my socials, my professional GMing page, and all my other stuff. Have a good day.